Welcome back to part 27 of Sophie and Jumong. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. Inside the speeding ambulance, the siren's wail shredded the tense silence that wrapped around Sophie, Jumong, and the paramedics. Dong Hyun's rigid body jolted slightly with every turn the driver made, and for a moment, Sophie thought she heard her own heart pounding louder than the siren itself. The paramedic's voice cracked as he struggled to keep the oxygen mask steady over Dong Hyun's face. "Ma'am, his vitals are dropping. Step back!" Sophie barked, her calm voice slicing through the panic like a scalpel. She slipped the mask from the paramedic's trembling hands and checked the man's airway herself. Jumong crouched opposite her, gripping the steel rail beside the stretcher, his eyes wide, sweat breaking at his temple despite the icy blast of the air conditioning. Dong Hyun's chest heaved once, then stilled in a way that made the blood drain from Sophie's face. She pressed her fingers hard against his neck. The weak pulse fluttered once, twice, then vanished beneath her touch. "We're losing him! Bag him now! Keep the airway clear!" she ordered. The paramedics obeyed instantly, fumbling to adjust the manual resuscitator. Sophie's mind raced. Something was wrong beyond the seizure. This wasn't just the brain misfiring, it was something deeper, hidden, and lethal. She pressed her stethoscope to his chest again, blocking out the rattling oxygen tank and Jumong's strangled breathing. Then she felt it. Too much pressure, the telltale rattle in his lower lungs. Internal bleeding. "Damn it, bleed in the lower extremities, his blood's pooling, pressure's too high," she snapped, more to herself than to them. Her eyes flicked up at the paramedic, frozen in fear. "I need a sterile blade. Now!" The paramedic's eyes widened. "Doctor, what—" "Blade!" she shouted, grabbing it the moment he passed it to her with shaking hands. Jumong's voice cracked, barely a whisper. "Sophie!" But Sophie had already braced Dong Hyun's foot in her palm. With unshakable precision, she made a sharp incision under his sole. A thin line of dark blood spilled out, pooling onto the stretcher sheets. The built-up pressure hissed its release in that fragile stream. She pressed her gloved hand over it, massaging gently to drain the clot. Her hair stuck to her forehead, her breath ragged but her eyes cold and clear. "Stay with me. Stay with me. Good. Good." His pulse is fluttering back. "Bag him. Keep bagging." Jumong stared at her, speechless, tears burning the corners of his eyes. For a moment, the woman he loved wasn't the gentle Sophie he tucked to sleep at night. She was a surgeon, a storm, a command he'd never witnessed up close. As the ambulance swung into the emergency bay, the doors flew open to waiting orderlies. Sophie didn't pause. She leapt down with the stretcher crew, pressing compressions on Dong Hyun's chest as they rolled him inside. Her voice cut through the chaos. "Severe seizure with suspected cerebral bleed, airway stable, pressure vented, pulse faint but present, prep theater now." Behind her, Jumong stumbled out of the ambulance, his knees almost buckling from the adrenaline still pounding through him. He looked at Sophie, his fiancée, the woman who'd just dragged life back from the brink with her bare hands, and for a heartbeat, all he could do was whisper, "Thank you. Thank you." Inside the hospital walls, bright lights swallowed them whole. Sophie running alongside the stretcher, already scrubbing her hands with antiseptic foam, shouting orders that no one dared question. Dong Hyun was still breathing. For Sophie, that was enough. Hours blurred like rain against the windows of the small waiting lounge. Gina sat curled against her mother's side, dozing off and on. Elias paced the hallway with his phone in hand, but no longer talking, just watching the theater doors like they might devour him too. Jumong hadn't sat once. He stood by the frosted glass, arms crossed tight over his chest, replaying every second in that ambulance. Sophie's steady hands, the blade, the calm that split open the fear boiling inside him. Finally, the red theater light flicked off. The doors swung wide, and 3 surgeons in green scrubs stepped out, fatigue etched around their eyes, but relief too, unmistakable in the lines of their faces. Sophie was the first to meet them halfway down the corridor. She had washed her face in the family bathroom, but the ring of tiredness clung stubbornly beneath her eyes. She braced herself for bad news, but the lead surgeon, a tall man with streaks of silver at his temples, surprised her by taking her hands in both of his. "Dr. Nam?" he said, breathless with gratitude. "Or should I call you Mrs. Lee already?" She blinked. "It's still Miss Nam for now, but yes? You have saved his life tonight," the surgeon said, loud enough for Jumong and everyone else to hear. "Had you not decompressed the built-up pressure in his lower circulation, the clot would have blocked his pulmonary artery before we could open him. Most young doctors wouldn't think to check there. And you did it in a moving ambulance." Behind her, Jumong exhaled a shaky laugh, somewhere between disbelief and unspoken worship. Gina squeezed her mother's hand so hard the older woman winced. Sophie's eyes widened. "I was afraid I made it worse. There was no time to scan." "Better than any scan," the second doctor cut in, shaking his head in amazement. "You read the physical signs. Trusted your training. We'll update his chart, but he's stable. In fact, we agreed he doesn't even need to go through intensive care. We'll transfer him straight to the general ward once he's fully awake." Sophie's hand flew to her mouth, relief flooding through her so fast her knees nearly buckled. Jumong was at her side in 2 strides, his arm locked tight around her waist. One of the younger surgeons interjected shyly, glancing between Sophie and Jumong. "Forgive us for asking. Your field experience shows more than just emergency training. May I ask, Dr. Nam, where you practiced before coming to Korea?" Sophie nodded, her voice steadier now that the crisis had passed. "I studied medicine and specialized in trauma surgery in Namibia. I worked nearly 2 years in the state hospital before I received a scholarship for my master's degree here in Seoul. Graduation will be a week from today." The lead surgeon's eyebrows shot up. "So you're already a qualified surgeon? That explains everything. Incredible instincts tonight. You didn't hesitate where most would freeze." She ducked her head, embarrassed by the sudden spotlight. But beside her, Jumong's grip on her waist tightened with quiet pride. The kind of pride that melted away every doubt she'd ever carried about belonging far from home. Before the nurse reappeared with news of Hyun waking, Elias tugged Jumong aside to a dim corner of the hallway. For once, there was no teasing in his voice, only the brittle edge of truth that brothers at heart could share without shame. "Jumong, what if—" Elias began, then shut his mouth, staring at his shoes before forcing himself to look up. "What if he hadn't made it tonight? You know you'd have to carry that secret forever. No grave, no chance to stand beside him in the open. And your father—" Jumong's throat bobbed. He glanced back through the glass where Sophie sat with Gina, the worry still faint on her face despite her calm. "I know," he rasped. "If he had died before father knew the truth—" Elias laid a firm hand on his shoulder. "But he didn't die, because of Sophie. So stop trembling inside. When he wakes up, you do what you always do." Jumong nodded once, fighting the quake in his chest that only Elias ever saw. Then the nurse's voice cut through the heavy air. Hyun was awake, asking for water, asking for the moonlight, alive because a Namibian doctor, in love with a Korean heir, had refused to lose him tonight. Once the team finished praising Sophie, 2 senior doctors discreetly asked Jumong to step aside into a quieter consultation room. The walls hummed faintly with the hospital's midnight energy as they closed the door behind him. "Mr. Lee," began the older physician gently, "you should know the deeper reason your uncle survived tonight. The seizure was serious, but in a way, it forced his nervous system to reconnect. For years, his paralysis was partly due to a complex trauma loop, both physical and psychological. But now, after tonight's event and our latest scans, his brain is no longer showing the same damage markers. The affected pathways have reactivated." Jumong's breath caught. "So, he's not paralyzed anymore?" "Correct. He will still need gentle rehab, but the major blockage is gone. Also, his memory may return more vividly now. Was he shown anything unusual before the attack?" Jumong hesitated, then murmured, I showed him an old photo, him and my father as young boys. He seemed to recognize it. The doctors exchanged meaningful glances. That image might have been the catalyst. Sometimes a deeply buried memory holds the key to the body's locked parts. Your bond may have freed him from the final chain he carried alone. Gina and her mother were the first to slip quietly through the hospital room door. The lights were dim but calm, bathing Dong-hyun's face in a softness that made the tubes and monitors seem less harsh. He lay slightly propped up, eyes open now, lids fluttering as he fought the heaviness in his bones. Gina's breath caught when she saw him awake. She moved to his side, her mother just behind her. "Appa," Gina whispered, the word trembling out of her like a prayer finally answered. She took his hand gently, and for a moment, they only looked at each other. Father and daughter, years of silence pressed into this fragile reunion. His lips shaped her name slowly, voice raw but trying. "Gina." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She bent and hugged him carefully, mindful of his weakness. Beside her, her mother wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve before leaning down to touch her forehead to Dong-hyun's, murmuring soft words only he could hear. His answering smile was faint but alive. When Sophie stepped in next, she paused at the foot of the bed, gathering herself. Then she crossed over, her eyes warm and bright. "You did so well tonight, sir," she said softly, leaning in to kiss his hand. He managed a small smile for her, a hint of gratitude flickering in his tired gaze. Elias came last, before Jumong. He gripped Dong-hyun's shoulder lightly, his voice low but brimming with relief. Finally, it was Jumong's turn. He closed the door behind him, stepping forward until the hum of the machines and the faint ticking of the wall clock felt distant. Dong-hyun's eyes found him, clearer than they had been in years. "Jumong," his voice cracked, yet the name held like a lifeline. "It's me, I'm here," Jumong said, his throat tightening. He lowered himself to the bedside, closer than before. Dong-hyun's fingers twitched, brushing against Jumong's sleeve. "Photo," he rasped. "Show me, again." Wordless, Jumong pulled the old, creased photograph from his pocket. The twin boys in uniform, forever young. He placed it in Dong-hyun's hands. The old man stared, tears welling in the corners of his weary eyes. "I miss my brother," he whispered brokenly. Jumong pressed his palm gently over Dong-hyun's knuckles. "You'll see him soon. Just a few more days here for your body to grow steady. Then I promise, I'll bring him to you myself. You will not be apart again." Dong-hyun's tears slid down slowly, but for the first time they were not tears of loss, but of coming home. 4 days before the hospital discharge, Jumong sat with Sophie on the balcony where the night air felt forgiving. He took her hands and, in a calm voice, told her everything. How Chairman Lee had confessed the hidden truth. Dong-hyun was not just an uncle, but his true father, the twin brother who had saved him at birth. Sophie listened without interrupting, her eyes wide but soft with understanding. She whispered that she had suspected something ever since she noticed the identical scar he shared with Gina. It all made sense now. The photo, the gentle bond he felt with Dong-hyun even before the words existed. The next morning, after breakfast, Jumong called Gina and her mother into the sunlit sitting room. He spoke plainly, no secrets left, explaining how Chairman Lee had hidden his brother's existence to protect them all, and how Dong-hyun's memory loss had kept his real family in the dark all these years. Gina gasped and covered her mouth, tears mixing with a stunned laugh. Her mother sank into the sofa, whispering prayers under her breath, thanking God that her husband's lost blood ties had returned whole at last. They didn't dwell on old betrayal. They talked about how to tell Chairman Lee when Dong-hyun was ready, how this bond, hidden for decades, was about to be made whole again. It was quiet, honest joy, a secret now shared by the right hearts. 4 days after the emergency, the spring morning felt like a quiet promise. Dong-hyun, though still speaking slowly, could now stand with help. Nurses smiled as they removed the last IV. Gina fussed over his blanket, while her mother packed his medicines into a small basket. Sophie checked his pulse one last time, her gentle words soothing him. Beside her, Jumong watched in silent gratitude, the man he had protected for months, now ready to reclaim his life. Outside, a black sedan waited to take them back to the villa where soft sunlight danced through the blooming garden. By evening, the villa was warm with family laughter. Hyun rested in his favorite chair, Sophie close by, while Gina and her mother prepared warm broth in the kitchen. But for Jumong, another truth still needed a voice. Before sunset, he drove alone to the Han estate. The heavy oak doors opened into the old study where Chairman Lee, the father who had raised him, stood waiting, back straight, eyes searching. Jumong bowed low the way he had when he was a boy. "Father, it's time you hear everything."